Welcome back to Coffee with Kish. So today we're going to geek out about Mormonism through film. So there are Mormons out there in the arts and entertainment world, but there also is a vibrant film scene in Mormonism. A lot of it is admittedly kind of kitschy, the kind of stuff that Mormons make for Mormons to make fun of themselves in lighthearted ways. But then there's more serious attempts at cinema, like the works of Richard Dutcher, and here I'm specifically thinking of films like God's Army and Brigham City, both of which I've seen and enjoyed very much. And then there are historical films. Now, Mormons have been making film for a long time. In fact, my great-grandfather invested in a Book of Mormon film. The family claim is that he did so to the tune of $500. And the movie was a flop. I think it was called something like Corianton. And, did my great-grandfather actually invest in this film? Did he invest so much money in this film? It's true that the film existed, that the film was a flop, but I just take some small pride in that, at least family lore about a connection to Mormon film. Because I love film. I'm not a big film buff, but I watch a fair amount of movies, and some of them you might actually call tasteful and sophisticated cinema, real films. But then, like everybody else out there, I enjoy a lot of goofy flicks, popcorn fodder, if you will. So, historical Mormon film. Well, the LDS Church itself, for educational purposes, has depicted a lot of events of the Restoration in film. And it's kind of surprising to me that the latest big film efforts in the Mormon community are not funded and produced by the church, but rather produced by faithful Latter-day Saints and organizations who are defending and promoting the LDS Church and its faith claims. Here I'm thinking specifically of the 2021 film Witnesses, directed by Mark Goodman, starring Paul Wuthridge as Joseph Smith. Now, this is really not only an interesting film, its origins, I would say, are interesting because the primary driver behind this film is an apologetic and scholarly organization, which emphasis you put there on scholarly or apologetic will be, kind of reflect your perspective on all of this. But the Interpreter Foundation is a kind of successor to the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, which was spearheaded early on in the 1980s, I think, by Jack Welch, a professor of law at Brigham Young University, whom I actually once worked for as a teaching assistant when he and my Roman history professor, John Hall, who is recently deceased, sadly, taught a history of the New Testament course, or history of the Gospels course. So it was a mixture of Roman history and, history of Jesus together. And of course, those two are intersect fully in first century Palestine. So these two guys, John Hall, the Roman historian, Jack Welch, who was a trained classicist in his own right, but also an expert in Jewish law and just ancient law in general. They got together and taught this course, and I was the teaching assistant. And I think really Jack Welch, Professor Welch of the law school, used my services much more than my own professor, John Hall, did. In fact, I would get calls at 8 in the morning from Jack Welch telling me he wanted to meet with me, et cetera, et cetera. And the stories that I've heard about Jack, and I really, really like him. He's a great guy, energetic, enthusiastic, optimistic, friendly. I can't say enough good things about Jack Welch. Well, he kind of has a reputation for keeping odd hours and contacting people in odd hours. Maybe that's not reflective of other people's experience, but from what I've heard, I went to church with one of his college roommates who told me that he would do things like practice his band instrument at late hours of the evening, which disturbed my former ward friend. Anyway, so Jack Welch founded Farms, and sometime in the 1990s, no, it was early 2000s, I guess. I hope I'm not mingling the history there. Farms got pulled into BYU at the invitation or insistence of President Gordon B. Hinckley, the late LDS prophet, 2 prophets ago now. Now we're on Nelson now. Before Nelson, there was Monson, and before Monson there was Hinckley. And I have a lot of good memories of President Hinckley, but he was responsible for sort of strong-arming the Farms organization, which was, even though it was largely staffed by or a lot of the contributors were BYU professors. He moved them onto campus where they became the Neal Maxwell Institute. And from there, the Neal Maxwell Institute kind of changed over time and became a different kind of organization. It wasn't focused on the more apologetic Hugh Nibley style of defending Mormonism through antiquity work that Farms had been doing, and became now more of a religious studies organization, at least for a while. It continues to morph, and I don't want to get anything wrong here, but in that transformation, a couple of its key sort of leading lights or key members left the Neal Maxwell Institute, and I know that, from the story that I've heard, one of their former students, a gentleman by the name of David Bakavoy, whom I really love a lot. He's a wonderful guy who, by the way, was a student in that class taught by Jack Welch and John Hall. That's where I first met him. David Bakavoy, who was an institute teacher, and who has, I don't know what his standing with the church is now. I know he's gone through some changes recently, but you can go look him up and look at his podcast appearances. David's a wonderful scholar. He got a PhD in biblical studies at Brandeis. And another interesting coincidence is that I taught a semester at Brandeis in a different department from the one that he studied in, but I taught for a semester at Brandeis some years after he graduated from Brandeis. But David was friends with these exiles from the Maxwell Institute, and they got together at an Olive Garden, I think it was. This is the story. This is the story as I've heard it. Take it with a grain of salt. And he had an idea. David had an idea for a new group that would replace Farms, that would have the sort of independence that Farms once had. And this was the Interpreter. It became Interpreter. And Interpreter really kind of took off, and it's going gangbusters and producing a lot of scholarly and apologetic material. You can buy their stuff. I know it's available on Amazon and elsewhere, so if you're really into the intersection of Mormonism and ancient studies, and in a sort of apologetic vein, you'll really love the stuff that Interpreter Foundation does. And, they also are, I think, strong defenders of their faith. They mix it up with other people who are critics. This was part of what made them a little bit controversial in the past. The, sharp elbows are thrown here and there, and this is part of my history with the folks at Farms and Interpreter. I'll tell you the story sometime, but I don't want to really make this personal or negative because, even though I have disagreements with the Farms folk and disagreements with the Interpreter folks, some more than others. There's some of them that I've had really cordial and good interactions with, and sometimes they've been really kind of been there for me on a personal level, and I appreciate that very much. But we disagree, and I think they would agree that we disagree about important things. Anyway, so that's Interpreter. It comes out of the Neil Maxwell Institute group that used to be Farms, and one of the Farms' big contributions, as it were, was the publication of Nibley's writings. So the collected works of Hugh Nibley was one of the main projects that Farms came out with, and so I do have a kind of nostalgic and sentimental attachment to this whole effort, even though